There we go. Guys, welcome to today's Elite Coaching Call. The topic of today's discussion is going to be about account simplification and account structure. It was a topic raised by someone in my team just earlier today, actually. And, we're talking about iOS 14 and kind of where things are going right now. There are changes we are making and there are changes we are testing to see if they're going to work, what's going to be the best way to optimize different parts of our approach to testing, optimization, and scaling. And, making the best of what we've got. Things have changed. We've lost breakdown reports in Ads Manager. Data isn't now, it never was accurate, but it's less accurate than it ever was. So we have to find different ways to cut through what's happening with Facebook right now. So I'll give you an idea of kind of what's on our mind and what we're working towards, so that it gets you thinking now about the different approaches that you could be thinking about as well. And, as we start to get more and more information, as we always do, we push that into our processes and our SOPs and into the BPM method and things like that. But really the goal right now is to be able to predict as much as possible where Facebook will be going with its data, especially around attribution. So I'm part of the attribution panel at Facebook, and they are looking to release changes and improvements on their attribution. But, before I kind of touch on attribution in general, one of the things that kind of, I saw an email come out this weekend from someone whose email list I'm on, and he has a new course on how to fix the iOS 14 problem. And I just want to reiterate, there is no fix. If there was a fix, Facebook would have fixed it. There are workarounds. There are things you can do to improve your data. There's different account structures you can use, which is what we're testing and which I'll be sharing today. And there are attribution tools that allow you to enhance your data, but nothing will fix the problem unless you're Apple and you decide to fix the problem. So just as far as understanding where things are right now, we have to make sure our domains are set. We have to make sure our conversions are set, the 8 conversion events. We have to make sure that, we're aware that the data is not going to be accurate and things like that. So we've covered a lot of the iOS 14 things in the last many months. But one thing that is really interesting now is what's going to work when it comes to account structure and what's the best way to deal with what's going on. So at the top level, when we set up our accounts, we have our kind of templated account structure. So at the basic level, we've got our cold, warm, and hot campaigns, and then you might have existing customers if you've got existing customers at the bottom. So we'll just call this the customer campaign. And that's the most basic setup for an account, and it's essentially a funnel. Excuse my poor drawing. This part doesn't really change. So you can still set up your cold audiences. You can exclude your warm, your hot, and existing customers. You can still set up your audiences around email lists, video views, and engagement. And then site visitors, that becomes a slight problematic area. And then existing customers, as long as you've got email addresses, as well as your website conversion, you can retarget existing customers. Now, the problem, first of all, is here. So that, all of this data up here is on the platform. So this is all kind of Facebook level. At the bottom is on the website. So where the problem lay for iOS 14 is here. So when we talk about audiences, first of all, the audiences mostly impacted are anything that hits your website. So viewed your content page, viewed your landing page, add to cart, things like that. That data, when it comes to iOS 14, will be impacted, because if people are opting out of tracking, that's them saying to Facebook and other ad platforms, we don't want you to put us in your audiences for retargeting, for targeting, whatever it is. So that then becomes a problem for these audiences. So first of all, realizing that your audiences may be reduced for iOS 14 is the first thing. And also realizing that there is a different web platform out there that is used by lots of people as well, is Android. So recently I shared some stats around uptake of iOS and Android and the number of people who are opting out of traffic, and it does change by country. So I believe it was, I think Brazil, a lot of people actually opted in, and there will be a lot of countries where people are just more okay with it. I believe the US was probably the highest opt-out rate. There's a lot more in the news around what's going on with privacy and privacy concerns. So first of all, it's not a blanket problem. It's not like every single country and every single niche is impacted in the same way. There's also additional data on different niches like e-commerce or online shopping, I think they called it. There were more people opting into traffic tracking than other things like gaming. So first thing I want you to think about is when you're looking at your audiences, it will come down to which countries you're targeting and which niche you're in, but then looking at your specific cases. So, when you are running your campaigns, a really good thing to do is to split your audiences by, mobile and desktop, and then split your audiences by iOS and Android, and see what kind of data is coming through. Because one of the kind of proxy setups to see what the data looks like is actually, if you think about your ad set. So let's say you've got a campaign here and you've got 3 ad sets here. One is desktop, one is mobile iOS, and one is mobile Android. Now, if you're running a campaign and you've split your audience into 3 of these, and you've got the same ads running, it might be a single ad, 3 ads, whatever it is. But if all you're doing is to test the same audience across these 3 different platforms, let's say, for example, Android and desktop have similar results, but they're positive. CPA is good, ROAS is good, but you see a massive difference in iOS, then that's your first indicator that iOS is probably impacting your results. Because if, for example, both of these are showing good ROAS, good CPA, good whatever stats that you're tracking on the website, then that could be a reason for splitting your actual data, your ad sets when it comes to campaign structure. So, almost like when we do calibration testing, where we want to test different audiences and get CPMs and figure out which audiences are going to be expensive to test, which ones are going to be potentially more profitable. I think this is something worth doing as a calibration test. Now, there's 2 parts of this. When is iOS 14 and all the changes that happen on version 14.5 going to actually have a significant impact on your account? That's going to take some time. So if you do this right now, you might want to do it in a month's time, in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time as well, just to see what's actually happening and be able to track that data. So in this format, all you do is pick a single audience, split it 3 ways: desktop, mobile iOS, mobile Android. Probably just select the 1 placement, so Facebook newsfeed, and then select 1 ad, your best ad. So essentially what you're doing is a Facebook split test. And if you run this as a Facebook split test, i.e. using the split test tool, then that will give you, the validation on the statistics and stuff like that. But, with this kind of setup, when you're splitting these audiences like these, you're trying to see how those platforms, how the different devices will perform. But when you run it as a Facebook split test, Facebook will ensure that someone will only see 1 ad from one of these ad sets. So that's why the Facebook split test system is better, because it will split your traffic by these 3. And if someone falls into the Android, they won't then see the desktop version. So you keep your data clean. So setting this up as a Facebook split test will allow you to just see what's going on with your data. So you can, that as a calibration test is definitely worth doing. You do that with your ideally an audience that you've used and tested, and you have some idea that you've got some performance on it. When you do that split, then you can actually see what's going on. So that will then inform you as to what kind of issue you've got at the moment with iOS 14. Now, there's a lot of people that have seen performance maybe not as good as it was, and they'll immediately fall back to saying, well, it's iOS 14. I want you guys to take the data-led approach. Let's look at the data and see if your account's actually being impacted or not. So that's the first thing. Then the second question is, all right, now my data is in fact infected. I was going to say infected, impacted. What do I do about that? Well, when it comes to your audiences, first of all, there's a high chance then that you're missing out on retargeting and you're missing out on existing customers if people have actually opted out of iOS 14.5 onwards, and that's impacted your accounts. So for example, when you're running your retargeting, let's just say you're retargeting anyone that's visited the site in the last 14 days. Well, if a chunk of that traffic is on iOS 14.5, what happens is if people have opted out, you're not going to see that conversion data. Maybe you see the endpoint conversion because that's the way the Facebook tracking system has changed. So it may make your stats look worse than it should. So this is also why you need to be looking at your data on another platform. So Ads Manager is fine, but we have to rely less and less on just looking at Ads Manager for our optimizations. So how do you do that? Well, the other part of it is, so my preferred method is actually Google Analytics and using UTM tracking tags. So that allows you to put some data into your tags that will, for example, and in Elite, we've shared our tracking systems. It will allow you to actually put the data of which campaign, which ad set, and which ad into your tracking. So for example, if I have a campaign set up here and I've called it hot, whatever, that can be passed as a tag. If I put my ad set name in, I can put that as a tag and add as well. So in Google Analytics, I'm passing all that data through for the campaign, and I can create segments and analysis. Now, Google and Facebook work on different click data. Facebook works on last click from Facebook. Google just works on last click generally. So Google Analytics, whether the last click was from Google Ads or Facebook, that's generally what it'll be tracking and reporting in Google Analytics. But there are ways to change the view. You can change it based on Facebook's Google Analytics conversion paths. That's a whole different topic, and we'll cover that at some other point. But the long and short of it is, don't rely just on what's in your Facebook data, because sometimes, and I've seen this already, we'll have campaigns that look maybe not as good as they should on Ads Manager, but when you look at the actual results in Google Analytics in the back end, whether it's Shopify or ClickFunnels, the data is actually better than it shows on Ads Manager. Some cases it's not, but at the same time, you will start seeing on a daily basis, your results might look worse than they actually are. So that's just something you have to really be aware of, that, which regardless of your campaign structure and kind of what your performance is, you have to have a secondary look at other data as well. The more general approach is what we call eCPA and eROAS. So you take your overall sales or your overall leads and then take the spend as a ratio of that. But that really depends on how you've set up your expectations. So if you're running your own accounts, it's easier because you can make your own analysis and decide what good data is and what the performance is. If you're working with clients, then you have to set that expectation right up front. Like if you're taking on clients right now, make sure as part of your onboarding, as part of your pre-contract conversations, you are explaining to your clients that this is the way reporting works. You cannot rely on Ads Manager. And I guarantee one of the rebuttals or feedbacks you'll get from clients is, well, then if you can't read the data, how can you make good decisions on Facebook advertising? Well, that's, you can go into the full detail and say, this is how we run our ads and things like that. But there has to be a conversation around the fact that you're using Ads Manager to generally know what's working and what's not. And we're using the data as best we can, but we want to enhance it with data outside of it. Whether that's Google Analytics or Shopify or whatever the backend data is. But at the same time, the other thing about data is there's two sides of the coin here. So if I split, the Facebook data by web data, some of the data will be accurate. So CPM will be accurate, outbound click-through rate will be accurate, and your outbound cost per click will be accurate. So these three data points should be as accurate as they've ever been, whether that's 100% or not, because that's on Facebook and on their auction. So that's data they can see, and it's data they can report on. Where the problems occur is on web. So you might have view content, you might have a lead, you might have a ATC, whatever it is. This is where if people opt out of iOS 14 tracking, then this data becomes compromised. This data remains consistent. Now, if you're looking at optimizations and things, you can't make primary decisions off the data. So you can't say, click-through rate's now 3%, let's scale it, it's doing really well. It's not, maybe not the case. But when you're looking at your own data, or if you're explaining to clients, you will have this in your armory to say, we can still look at costs. We can still look at how the ads are performing. We can still see what our cost ratio is. We can still see the quality metrics of our ads. We can see how, engaging our ads are. We can look at the comments, we can look at the feedback. So this level of data is still usable. And so when you look at your breakdown reports, when you split it by segments and things like that, this data is still accurate. This data is going to have to be taken with a pinch of salt, and it's going to get worse over time. So I'm talking about 6 months, 12 months down the line. That data will be harder to interpret, but this is where you need to have that secondary data set up. So we talk about data first of all, because that is important to understand your account structure and what to aim for. So as I mentioned before, find out what the problem is and whether it's a problem with iOS 14 by doing that simple test. Then when you look at your actual campaign structure and setup, and this is something which I was speaking to my team earlier about, and we were talking about, does testing need to change? Are we going to do anything different on testing? Yes, we are. So our graduation testing system is based on 3 phases, right? So phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So here we want to find our best audiences. So this is about researching and testing and finding good ads. If you're starting a brand new account, you do your research and choose your best ads you can come up with. If it's an existing account, you pump your best ads into phase 1. Phase 2 is about ads and creatives and landers. So this is now, we have our good audiences. How can we then test to see if we can find new ads that work? And this is, what we call prospecting, but really it's a mix of optimization and scaling. So the idea here is, if we want to find our best audiences, we're going to have to do that research. So is it interest? Is it broad? Is it lookalikes? Is it behavior? So at the top level, that's what you're playing with. However, the problem occurs when you want to look at the breakdown. So previously we might run a campaign, which is, male and female, 25 plus, and would run the data. And then once we've got the data in, we would then split that data out. So we can look at the breakdown report in Ads Manager and say, right, we've run this data. Overall, it looked okay, but let's look at the breakdowns and see which audiences it actually really worked well for. At this stage, we're generally testing on the news feed or story ads or whichever specifically we're targeting. But the problem now is if you can't see the breakdown reports of, your add to carts, your cost per add to cart, your cost per purchase, your ROAS at the breakdown levels, what do?